David, Anoi Roi Loexar, Ino Desher Bitzene, Amay Menuchot Yan Filene, Nafshi Yeshove Gadchene, the Magle Tzedek Laman Shimo, Amki Elek Begetz Almava, Lo Yorah Kieta Imadi, Shiftacham and Shaftacha Hamurinachamuni, Tarach Lafana Shalchan, Negetzarat, Shanta Beshem Roshi, Kosir Vaya, October Hesed Yudefuni Koyamehaya, Bishafti Veda Anoi, Laorek Amin. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. He leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths, for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Rabbi Leshem will now share some words about his father.
In memory of Elimelech ben Tzvi Halevi and Chaya, Niftar died on the 14th of Iyar, the so-called minor holiday of Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, about which we read in the Torah in the 9th chapter of Bamidbar, that there were people who were, I'll just sort of roughly translate in English, there were people who were ritually impure, and they couldn't give the Passover sacrifice offering on Passover, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, and they said, it's not fair, why shouldn't we be able to do this mitzvah of giving this sacrifice? And Moshe said to him, I'm not sure what to do, I'm going to ask Hashem, I'm going to ask God. And God's word came back to Moshe and said, tell these people that whether they're ritually impure or they're far away from the place of the sacrifice, that they can still do it. A month later, on the 14th of Iyar, a month after the Passover sacrifice is normally given on the 14th of Nisan, the day before the Seder, they have a second chance a month later. In other words, Pesach Sheni is what I like to call the holiday of the second chance. There's a lot that could be said, and I'm sure will be said, about my father's amazing life and accomplishments. I would like to focus a little bit about the role of second chances in his life. Firstly, growing up in the small and impoverished village of Silts in the Carpathian Mountains, simply to remain alive was a second chance. In his family that had at some point, or maybe not simultaneously, 10 siblings, only 7 of them survived past infancy. So my father was the 5th child of 7 that had begun as 10. At this point, I'd like to digress a little bit and mention the intense commitment to Achnasat Orchim, to hosting guests that took place in his home. His family lived in the end of the street. There was one street that ran through Silts, the central street where most of the 50 Jewish families lived, and they lived in the last house. Itinerant beggars passed by on a daily basis through the village, and people, knowing that my grandparents would certainly never allow a beggar to have to leave town at night, would simply tell them, well, go to the Blobstein house, it's the last house on the left, and that they would always be able to stay there. And my father told me repeatedly that he did not remember a single night that they didn't have at least one beggar sleeping in their house, and he added, maybe as a flourish, or maybe for real, even on nights when my mother was giving birth at home. And I think this explained my father's extreme commitment and love of the mitzvah of Achnasat Orchim. When we were growing up, every Pesach Seder that we were home and Rosh Hashanah dinner was graced with guests, Jewish soldiers from nearby army bases, Jewish university students from Case Western Reserve University, or later from Indiana, and later Soviet Jewish refugees. we, or certainly speaking for myself, were not always able to live up to his standards of hosting, and I think that he found that very incomprehensible. For him it was second nature, or first nature. He also had a second chance when he finished his compulsory education at the age of 14 and was able to get an apprenticeship in Budapest to learn to be a leather handbag maker. This is what I would say was the first of what he often referred to as lucky breaks, which together saved his life during the Shoah, the Holocaust. Another came when the Nazis occupied Hungary in 1944. His older brother Sam, who was also in Budapest, decided to return home to be with the family, and my father decided to stay in Budapest. Sam and the rest of the family were deported to Auschwitz, where he was the only survivor. And my father would also recount second chances during the Nazi reign of terror in Budapest. For example, times when he was with groups that were being marched out to be shot, and for some bizarre, unknown reason were turned around in the middle, or sometimes because of the hearing of the Russian army fire nearby, that the captors decided to run away and let them go. There were other times when he, at least two occasions, when friends of his, Jewish friends, were able somehow to get a hold of Aero Cross uniforms of the Hungarian fascists and impersonate Aero Cross militiamen and save them in other situations. After the war, he returned home, as everyone did, looking for survivors in the family, and he had a second chance to repossess furniture which was stolen by their neighbors, and like to recount, he didn't like, none of it made him happy, but that he went to one of the neighbors. Their house when he got home was completely empty of anything, and nothing was left. I think he said even the windows were stolen. And he went to one of the neighbors and saw their table, and asked for it back, and the answer was, I'd rather take an axe and cut it to little pieces than let you have it back. And my father, who must have been an extremely gutsy 17-year-old, went to court, and he was on the right side at that time, and the neighbor, who was seen as a fascist sympathizer, ended up having to return the table. Another second chance came when my father was told, after being away for a few days from town, came back to be told by someone that while you were gone, there were rumors circulating that someone saw you poisoning a well. So all of us know what that implies, and he luckily left quickly. And the last big break was when he escaped from what had become Soviet Ukraine after the Soviet Union took control of the area, and he went with my Uncle Sam to cross the border, to be smuggled across the border into Slovakia. My uncle said to him, it's foolish for us to go together, you go now and I'll come next week, and he came 40 years later to Israel. After 3 years in London, my father came to the United States, took advantage of another second chance to complete his education, finished high school, then he was drafted and sent to Korea with his buddy Joe Blain, Zichrono Livracha, and he then took advantage of the GI Bill to finish his, to earn citizenship and to go to Rochester Institute of Technology, where he met my mom, and has taken care of him so faithfully, devotedly for so many years. Thank you, Mom. And after working for many years in book publishing in Cleveland, he was transferred to Indianapolis, where he jumped ship to head the Israel Bonds office, which he transformed into an extremely successful office. Many years later, when the bonds were downsizing and consolidating, they wanted to close his office, and he simply suggested they check the books. And when they saw he was still raising massive amounts of money from a tiny, modest office where he worked by himself with no expenditures, they decided that it was worthwhile to keep the office open. Of course, Dad was always super involved in whatever shul he was a member of at the time, in Jewish day school education, where he served in Indianapolis in the Hebrew Academy as the head of the scholarship committee for many years, enabling many children, including a lot of children of Soviet immigrants, to get a Jewish education. All of these things are well known. After 40 years, he took advantage of a chance to return to his old buddies here in Cleveland, where he and Mom have lived very happily for the last 15 years. To return to Pesach Sheni, the commentators point out the unique nature of this holiday of the second chance, that it in fact was initiated by the people themselves. It was not a mitzvah, a decree, a commandment given by God initially. It came from the fact that people who felt bad about not being able to perform a mitzvah turned to Moshe and asked him for a second chance. People with perfectly good, legitimate excuses not to have done the Passover sacrifice refused to accept their exemption and beseeched Moshe for a second chance. He sent their appeal to Hashem, who responded enthusiastically in their favor. For you see, ultimately the main thing isn't what we accomplish, but rather what we yearn to do, how much we desire to serve Hashem and to fix the world, and in that our Father truly excelled. And since we're talking about Pesach, I'll just close with one memory. My father absolutely loved to bake matzah with us, to bake shmura matzah with us, especially for the Seder on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, a few hours before the Seder. He was always super excited that we were going to bake matzah again. Often it's not the first time that year. And he was a very skilled oven worker, which those of you that have done it with us know it's a tricky job. And in fact, the other day, my wife Julie's Aunt Sophie wrote to me the following when I told her that my father was very ill. She wrote, I have a short but important memory of your father. I remember the year I spent Pesach with you in Israel. Rita, it's my mother-in-law, Rita and I rolled out the matzah dough, brought it from the bowl in Julie's lap on the other side of the kitchen, and brought it to where your seated father and Kinneret, maybe Shoshi, supervised the 18 minutes on some kind of cooker that I can't visualize now. Wonderful matzah to begin the Seder. Family-made matzah. I never really knew your father, but he always has been part of my family memories. May his memory be blessed. May he be a Melitz Yosher for Mom, and his sons and daughters-in-law, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and all of Am Yisrael. Dad, please forgive me for the times in which I did not show you the proper respect.
Max will share some words next.
First, I want to take the time to thank everyone who has been sending our family love during this time. It just shows us truly how amazing our Saba Mike was. I don't really think using one word to describe my Saba would do him justice, but there is one that has always stuck out to me: superhero. For pretty much my entire life, I always looked at my Saba as this mythical, almost larger-than-life figure. I can see it clearly now, me walking into day school, dragging my Saba into the class so that he could speak and share his stories. Every time I heard him tell a story to the class that I had already heard previously, it still felt like it was the first time I was hearing it. It goes without saying, but my Saba overcame obstacles in life that most people would never face. He had to face near death at so many points in his young life, yet somehow managed to find his way, making the most of his life with his beautiful family. And as I'm sure many of you know, family meant everything to our Saba. 65 years with our beautiful Safta Sylvia, who was his rock. I cannot give you a better power couple than these two. They were not only the life of the party, but they built a beautiful life as well. My dad, with my Uncle David and Uncle Mark, were always so treasured by my Saba and Safta, and then the grandkids and great-grandkids that followed. Our family continued to grow, and it only gave our Saba more joy. I don't think anything in the world meant more to him. My Saba's devotion to the state of Israel always stuck out to me. He always pushed me to pray more, go to shul more. He always, of course, urged me to marry Jewish, as he should. But really, when it comes down to it, look at how deeply integrated our family is in the Jewish community. It's so beautiful how everyone in their own way contributes to the world of Judaism and the state of Israel, and we all have Mike to thank for that. I could probably say a million other things about my Saba, but I think anyone who knew him knew how amazing he was, so I really don't need to go on about any of that. Our family is so thankful for having had the opportunity to have him in our lives. I know personally, my life will never be the same without him. He was always my idol, the person I looked to strive to be, and more than that, he was my Saba. And Sunday, I lost a piece of me, as did our family and anyone who knew him. But we also today are reminded of how truly amazing he was, and we can celebrate that in his amazing life. We will continue to cherish our heritage, our family, of course our Savta, your rock, and every beautiful memory that we had with you. I love you forever, Saba.
Ezra will speak next.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for everyone who came out today to pay tribute to my Saba Mike, and many people who've traveled far and wide, both across the state, nationally, and even internationally, to again pay final respects to my Saba. And I know he really appreciates the efforts everyone made to come out today. So it may be cliche to speak about how much family meant to someone and how much family was everything to them, at the funeral. But I really think that is appropriate for my Saba Mike. So growing up, we always just referred to him as Saba. But as my sister and I had our own children, and my father took on the name Saba, so my grandfather became Saba Mike, and then my son Moshe refers to my father as a Saba regular. So I have to work on rebranding or something. So, but I have many fond memories of the time I spent with my Saba. Both as a child and growing up into adulthood. And when I was speaking with my sisters earlier today, we were sharing some thoughts and some treasured memories, and a few things that stuck out were number one, just even simply spending time with them in a casual, relaxed way at their home, both in Indy and in Cleveland. He was always good for a game of Rummy Cube, most often encouraged by my Savta. Vividly remember playing at the glass table in the house in India, which had to make sure nobody would go underneath to look at the tiles from the bottom. We also enjoyed being in the kitchen with Saba. Saba was a very skilled chef. His specialty was Saba soup, which I believe there's no known recipe other than taking whatever vegetables are available in the kitchen, dicing them finely, and putting them in a pot, and somehow that always came out delicious. And I know we always enjoyed helping my Saba prepare in the kitchen. And another specific culinary memory was helping prepare charosas for the Pesach Seder. I can still vividly remember the nut chopping tool for chopping up the walnuts. And that was always a very fond memory as a Pesach Seder preparation that we were able to participate in with Saba. One more thing we enjoyed as kids was going to see Saba in his office. That was just fun for us to see his cool office chair, to raid the corporate stash at Israel Bonds of various stationery and pens, which was always fun for us. And then especially hitting up Saba's stash of nutty bars, which is one of his favorite culinary delights that he had a stash of at the office. I'm not sure if you ever knew about those, but we certainly enjoyed sharing those when we saw him in the office. But I'd like to just zoom out for a moment, instead of focusing on my relationship with Saba, just focusing on Saba himself. And in 1996, the USC, University of Southern California Shoah Foundation, sat down with Saba, and they produced a 90-minute video where a gentleman named Don Schwartz interviewed my Saba in Laguna Hills, California, of all places. And the recording is out there. I would encourage anyone who's interested to take a look. And I had the distinct privilege of coming out to Cleveland from New Jersey last week as my Saba's health took a turn for the worse. So I came out just last week, and on the plane, I watched a lot of this video. And again, I would encourage everyone to watch it. Really incredible. It's meaningful to hear him tell a story in his own words. And many of the stories that he spoke about, well, I had already was familiar with, having seen them via the written word or kind of written accounts. It was truly special to hear it kind of from his mouth in his words. And again, he mentioned many of the stories that have already been shared, and I want to repeat them. But towards the end of the interview, so the interviewer Don Schwartz asked my Saba, so how were you able to have so many lucky breaks, as my Saba called them, or near misses, near incidents, for language my father's familiar with. So how were you able to survive? And he said he really viewed it as a lucky break. He had many lucky breaks. He was very fortunate in that regard. And in his typical modest way, he said he was not particularly strong. He was not particularly smart. He was not particularly courageous. And really, it was all thanks to what I would call divine providence that he was able to survive the war. But I'd like to respectfully disagree with one point of my Saba's from that statement. And specifically as it relates to how he viewed himself in terms of his courage. And in light, we'll do this in light of a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs from his 2005 book, To Heal a Fractured World. I'm going to read the quote from Rabbi Sachs. So Rabbi Sachs, any good rabbi would, is dealing into kind of dialectics and comparing and contrasting two different ideas. And in this particular chapter, he discusses the two ideas of optimism and hope. And Rabbi Sachs writes, optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that, together, we can make the world better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. And I think this hope, above all, is really what made my Saba so unique and so special. I think many of us have encountered different Holocaust survivors who, post-war, certainly did not have attitudes of optimism or hope, and certainly no one can blame them, and no one can judge them, and everyone can understand why, through the horrors they faced, their families murdered, communities destroyed, lives in turmoil, and my Saba, however, was really just the opposite. Not only did he emerge from the world believing the world could be a better place, and every step of the way, he actively engaged to make the world a better place. And he did this in several different spheres, which I'll go through very briefly. So, number one, just in terms of his own family. Right? With my Sapta Sylvia, he raised 3 sons, my Uncle Tzvi, my father, and my Uncle Daniel. And each in their own way, as Max mentioned earlier, have been leaders of the Jewish community in their own ways, whether through rabbinic leadership, volunteerism, community service, etc. And not only within his own family, but really part of the broader Jewish community. Every step of the way in my Saba's life, he not only participated in the Jewish community around him, but actively strove to make it better. A few examples include at RIT, he founded the Hillel, which I was only recently learned about. I think he was recently featured in an RIT Hillel publication. Also at the Hazen Hebrew Academy in Indianapolis, where my Saba was an administrator for many years, as has been mentioned, as I was on the board, part of the scholarship committee, etc., where he again enabled many children of other Holocaust survivors and immigrants to have a Jewish education, and which is again truly an incredible feat. He was also an active member of the B'nai Torah community in India, and I have many fond memories of various kiddushes and especially ice cream socials that my Saba and Sapta sponsored for the broader community. And then again, finally, just in terms of his communal activity, when they returned to Cleveland, they bounced around to a few shuls until they found the Ohev Tzedek Cedar Sinai, where I know first they connected very closely with first Rabbi Truoff, and then Rabbi Levitt, and I know that as happy as my Saba and Sapta were to be part of the Ohev Tzedek Cedar Sinai, real tongue twister. The community was equally happy, if not happier, to have them in their community because of their excitement and eagerness to be involved and to volunteer and participate in various shul events. So if you, so you can see here again that my Saba invested heavily with his time and efforts to really build out the community infrastructure wherever he was, whether it was, again, in synagogues, schools, etc. Zooming out a little bit, again, as also been mentioned, was my Saba's work for Israel Bonds. He was able to not only impact the local Jewish community in his immediate proximity, but really the world Jewish community. My father has always cautioned me, you can't believe everything you read on the internet, which is certainly good advice, but I did read that my Saba was responsible for raising over $100 million of Israel bonds. And aside for creating, fine risk-adjusted returns for his investors, much more valuably, this was, invaluable in terms of the fledgling state of Israel. This provided it with capital to build out the infrastructure of a country: roads, bridges, tunnels, waterworks, etc. And these funds for the Israeli government were really crucial in helping Israel emerge from the fledgling state it was, in the 40s and 50s to the modern state it is today. And then finally, zooming out even one more level from the world Jewish community to the kind of world community, we saw earlier the beautiful tribute from the U.S. military, where granted he didn't have a choice because he was drafted, but he did serve for 18 months overseas in Korea for the U.S. Army to help kind of defend freedom and peace in the world. And not only that, later in life as an adult, he was a well sought after Holocaust speaker for both Jewish and non-Jewish institutions alike. In the USC video, again, in his typical modest way, he said whenever he would get a call to speak at a Holocaust event, he would initially decline and refer them to a few of his peers who he thought were better speakers than him and had more interesting stories than him. But if they weren't available, he would do it. And I think this was my Saba's contribution to making never again not only a mantra, but the best way to make that a reality was by teaching and by educating all of those around him. And again, this was not an easy thing for him to do. He said in the video that on the one hand, you don't want to relive it. On the other hand, he can help but revisiting those memories every day of his life. So despite the fact that it was difficult for him to re-engage with those memories, he felt it was important and obviously worthwhile to do so. So I've always been very inspired by my Saba, by his commitment to his family, the immediate Jewish community, the world Jewish community, and really the world community. And something that I'll always take from him is the inspiration. Again, that if someone who faced such horrors and such atrocities at such a young age and went through, again, more than anyone really could ever imagine, and even such a person could have, again, not only optimism but also hope. Again, the thought that not only the world can be a better place, but the belief that we can partner with the world to make it a better place. That's how much more inspiration is that for all of us who never face those types of challenges or hardships. That we should do the same. So again, thank you for everyone else for coming. I know it means so much to my Saba that everyone's come out to support her, as well as my dad and uncles and our entire family. So thank you so much.
A few short love letters from the grandchildren in Israel that they sent over. They are written by Ellie and Sion, and then Mayan, Leora, Kinneret, and then Shoshi. Dear Saba, as a kid, I hung in my room a copy of the picture of you as a boy, maybe 15 years old, wearing a yellow star. I'm sure everyone has seen it. Looking at that picture now, I see the strength in your eyes, the tenacity and resourcefulness that would get you through the war and far beyond, and without which we wouldn't be here today. It's hard to imagine what it was like for you, losing almost your entire family at once. You must have been so scared, so lonely, you had to grow up so fast. Saba, one of my strongest memories of you is tactile. And I agree with this completely. The way you would reach out for my hand, grasp it, and squeeze it. Looking back, I realized a part of you was making sure I was real, that I'm not going to disappear. I hope that you are finally reunited now with your parents and siblings. And I want you to rest knowing that your family's here is safe and we will carry on your legacy. I love you, Ellie. For this one, forgive my Hebrew pronunciation. Saba Mike. What an honor to be your grandson. So loving, so caring, always focused, always clever, paying attention to every detail. How's Rivkala? What's with the kids? Your body was weak, but your spirit stronger than ever. The spirit that led you through World War II, the spirit that led you through the Korean War, the spirit that led you to decide to rebuild your life and family in America. The spirit that led you to devote your entire career around building and supporting the new state of Israel, the homeland of the Jewish people. You've always been an inspiration to me, not only never giving up, but always happy and cheerful, always prepared with a big smile. There's a verse that says, Nishmat Adam Ta'ir Panav, meaning one soul enlightens his face. Everyone around you felt to be your best friend, your kindness not to be missed. I was privileged to be with you almost 20 times in the past few years. We were able to build an intimate relationship and deep friendship. Yes, friendship, despite the minor detail of 55 years between us. Because that's just what you always were, a friend to all and a loving family man. I always wondered how you kept so cheerful and optimistic, despite all you've gone through, and the loss of most of your family in the horrific Holocaust. But never asked. I didn't want to hurt you. I know the answer. It's your firm decision to choose life and construction rather than the opposite. And you and dear Safta have created an amazing family with tens of grandchildren and great-children in Israel and in the U.S., all looking up to you as an inspiration of choosing the right path to life. I want to thank you for all you've given to me. It's so hard to say goodbye, but apparently time has come. I miss you so much already, and can't stop thinking about you and Safta, and all the times we spent together, never enough. Always seeking for more, always a tear when saying goodbye. Rest in peace, dear Saba. You'll always live in our hearts. Tehi nishmachta tzura b'tzror hachayim, from Zion. Our sweet, sweet Saba. It is hard to count the gifts we receive from you. What a blessing to have had such a special Saba. I wanted to thank you, Saba, for being a role model for me in so many ways. I feel like I received from you the gift of gentleness and softness. The way you loved and respected Safta Sylvia impacted me deeply. You really taught me how to love, how to engage in the world and the people around me with an open heart and humbleness. Love you and miss you, Mayan. And now for the girls. To my dear Saba Mike, Thank God we got to enjoy so many lovely, lovely moments together. I want to thank you for making such an effort to come visit us in Israel as much as possible, for making sure we have a strong and deep relationship with you and Safta, even though it was a long-distance relationship. Thank you for so many sweet hugs and kisses, and for expressing so much warmth and love towards me, for remembering every birthday of every one of your grandchildren, making us feel always loved and cared for. May you rest in peace, dear Saba. I love you forever, Leora. To my dear and beautiful Saba, thank you for your light, gentleness, and gentle wisdom. Thank you for being a friend of my heart since I was a child, a source of security and comfort, of silliness and playful affection. Thank you for creating this loving and sweet family together with Safta. Bless you, beautiful soul. You are in my heart. I love you, Kinneret. My dear sweet Saba, our visits were short these past few years. I was so blessed to have you at our wedding and to come visit you and Safta in Cleveland. Whenever we were together, you would take my hand and kiss it and tell me that you loved me. You did this over and over, planting your love in my heart permanently and deeply. Saba, you made me laugh a lot. You had a mischievous twinkle in your eyes that didn't call for many words on your part. When we left, you called me to your room and gave me about 10 pens in case I needed any. I didn't, but I'm glad I took them anyway. Thank you for being my loving and kind Saba. I love you. Rest in peace. Joshi.
Al Hirsch will now speak about his longtime friend.
I couldn't let go without saying a few words about my friendship with Mike. Dear friends and family, thank you for letting me share a few words about Mike. Today I'm so sad to say goodbye to Mike. He was a very dear friend of mine. I have known him since 1949. We met him in a newcomers club in Cleveland, and we served in the Korean War together. He was a member and served as a secretary of our Jewish War Veterans, Post 14. After the Korean War, we had so much fun speaking Korean to each other and joking around. It would make me laugh, and I always looked forward to get together with him again. He kept us entertained when we got together in our caucus club. Mike was friendly, kind, well-informed, and respectful to everyone. You could talk with him about anything. He had a special way of smiling and making you feel comfortable. He was a good friend. Mike, you made this world brighter place. I will always cherish our time together, and I will love you forever in my heart. He left us with a wonderful memory. You will be missed. Thank you for listening.
Today we mourn the loss of Mike Blain, a beloved husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. I first remember meeting Mike sitting alongside Joe in shul when I came for my Praber Shabbat. And on my first Shabbos, when I became the rabbi at Ohab Tzedek Cedar Sinai, Mike was there celebrating his 90th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I didn't know him well then, but I was already amazed by all that he had endured, the Shoah and the Korean War, to build a life and family in Cleveland. I was awed by his strength and perseverance. The Parsha that week 4 years ago discussed the qualities that a judge must possess. And Chazal tell us that a judge must combine the attributes, both of a tree and of a stone monument. Adaptable, yet always entrenched in Jewish values. These traits truly define Mike. Mike was born in 1928 in Czechoslovakia. He lost nearly his entire family in the Holocaust, except for an older brother and sister. From this unimaginable loss, Mike set out to rebuild his family, the Jewish community, and truly the world. Soon after the war, he traveled to England, where he met his lifelong friend Joe Blain. They would, of course, serve together in Korea. After the war, he met the love of his life, Sylvia, at an RIT Hillel event. They would go on to have 3 sons, David, Mark, Tzvi, and Daniel. Mike and Sylvia deeply loved their children, later grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Daniel, you told me that Mike would take you to baseball games. He wasn't particularly interested in sports. In fact, he didn't really like it at all. He would always bring an article related to the Jewish community to read. But his lack of interest didn't stop him from taking it. The needs of the Jewish community were always at the center of Mike's life. He was an active member of the Cleveland Jewish community and then of the Indianapolis Jewish community as well. Mike frequently told his story of survival to Jewish and non-Jewish groups alike, and he was committed to ensuring that the terrible lessons of the Holocaust were never forgotten. In Indianapolis, Mike also launched his new career with Israel Bonds. It was a position that gave him a great sense of meaning. He had deep connections to the state of Israel, and through Israel Bonds, was able to give something back to his people and help ensure their well-being. However, Mike was not just interested in the well-being of the Jewish people. When asked once what message he wanted to leave for future generations, he said that it was that intolerance and oppression of any kind and against any group must be confronted. Mike lived out this message. He even traveled on several occasions to Washington to protest against the genocide that was taking place in Africa. From Europe to Korea to Cleveland and Indianapolis, Mike was able to survive, endure, and thrive, always driven by his unwavering commitments to family, the Jewish people, and the betterment of the world. Mike passed on these values to his children, to his grandchildren, and to his great-grandchildren. May they continue to inspire us, and may his memory be a blessing. Rabbi Leshem will now recite Kalmale, the memorial prayer.
El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamsei Menucha Nichona Al Kanefei HaShechina B'mahalos Kedoshim utorim, K'zohar araki amazirim, Es nishmas Elimelech ben Tzvi Alevi v'chaya, Shalach l'olamo. בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעד אזכרת נשמתו, בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בססר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר אמן.
We're now going to proceed in a moment to the internment. This will be our final chance to say goodbye to Mike. And this is an act which is termed a chesed shel emet in our tradition, a true act of kindness. Because to bury someone is, of course, an act of kindness that they can never repay to you. We'll begin with the family putting in some shovelfuls. Then we'll place the cover over the coffin, and everyone else will have the opportunity to participate in this important mitzvah.